were especially fierce, and therefore Switzerland was as being in the landlocked country in the middle almost of Europe. We somehow were also concerned with that. We were surrounded at the time, especially in World War II, by Nazi countries. So Switzerland, France, Italy, and Austria, and Germany. Not Switzerland, Germany. All our neighboring countries, they were occupied by Hitler. And actually, we were not. And a lot of people asked, how do you manage to do that? And my answer to that is basically, we were economically more important to Hitler while being neutral than when he would have conquered us and occupied this Switzerland as well. So being neutral meant we could make deals, make a trade with Hitler and with the allies of the United Kingdom and the Americans and other countries that fought them in the Second World War. So we were, for both sides, we were kind of a trading platform, and they could, for example, Hitler could buy metals to build more weapons or through Switzerland, or he could buy other goods, and maybe also we provided some financial services. Some financial transactions could be made through Switzerland. And for that reason, we were of more use to him than when he would have occupied us, because then it would not have been possible to deal through Switzerland, to buy things through Switzerland anymore, because there was an embargo for all these Nazi countries from the US and the United Kingdom. So morally, one can probably say, this is a bit questionable, but it somehow guaranteed us that we are not conquered, and that we are can somehow stay independent. And this until today, there's discussion if this was correct or not, if this was a good behavior or not. And I think it's a very interesting question, and there's no simple answer to that. But this led to the situation that after the war, we had a very intact infrastructure and a working economy. And this gave us basically a starting advantage against the surrounding countries like Germany or Italy or France, that where a lot of the infrastructure was destroyed. And we used that pretty well. And in the 20th century, Switzerland became a very prosperous country, mostly again due to trade and financial services. We don't have a lot of natural resources like gold or silver or precious metals or whatever, but we somehow do a lot of international trade and the banking system is quite important in Switzerland as well. As I said, in recent years, we got a little bit under pressure. On the one hand, from the European Union, because all the surrounding countries, as I said, formed a little bit to make this European integrated economic area, where we somehow belong to geographically, but not politically at the moment. And we still have a lot of discussions how to define this relationship. And furthermore, the banking system in Switzerland profited a lot from the fact that taxes are pretty low here in Switzerland. And a lot of rich foreign people tried to bring their money to Switzerland to avoid paying taxes in their home countries. And for a long time, this was worldwide somehow accepted, even not very liked. But in, let's say, the last 20 years, pressure from the international community rose quite a lot that this is not an acceptable behavior anymore, and we should somehow be transparent and lay open when people from foreign countries bring money to Switzerland, and tell that to the tax authorities in their home countries that they also can ask for some taxes on this money in their home countries as well. And so this is the financial system of Switzerland is also changing a lot quite at the moment. Now, a bit more to politics away from the economy. You have probably got this small brochure, the Swiss Confederation, a brief guide. I think I distributed it to Father Arun before. And this guide is actually meant for foreigners living in Switzerland, and therefore it explains a lot of the parties we have and all these kind of things. But I try here to summarize a little bit the specialities we have in Switzerland compared maybe to India or other democracies. Like India, we have a two-chamber parliament system on the federal level, and on the regional and local level, we have mostly single-chamber parliaments or citizen assemblies in the small villages. I think that's a pretty universal thing in democracy. Most countries have something like that, or have such a system. But what is a little bit special is that for every law that Parliament decides on, we can actually force a referendum on it. We have to collect 50,000 signatures of citizens on paper, not electronically, to make it a bit more difficult. And when you have 50,000 signatures and hand them in, then there's a national vote, if this is a national topic, or a regional vote, if it's a regional topic, on that law. Even more, we can change our constitution by collecting 100,000 signatures of citizens. And then again, there's a vote on this amendment of the constitution. This means in practice that on all controversial issues, political issues, the citizens have the last word. And therefore, we also say in Switzerland, actually, all citizens together, this is the sovereign of Switzerland. So we don't have a queen, for example, like England has, or a very strong president as France has, for example. So we are really, most of the power is actually with the people. This only works when the results of these votes are accepted by everybody. So, of course, you can imagine that we have that people have different opinions. The cantons or different regions, they may have different opinions on certain topics. And when then this vote, and for example, all the French-speaking people voted yes, but all the German-speaking people voted no, because there are a little bit more German-speaking people, then of course the thing is declined. And then the French-speaking people, of course, have to accept that. And they do that, I think, because they exactly know if they don't, then the whole thing would break down. And the alternative would be that they, for example, the French-speaking people, they would have to then probably join France. It's unlikely that they will be able to form a country of their own, which is then would be even smaller than Switzerland today is. So the alternative for them would be to leave Switzerland, and somehow everybody agrees this is the much worse option than just to accept, okay, now majority decided, we accept that. And this is probably also a reason why such a system most probably only works in rather small countries. In a country like India, it would probably be difficult to implement such a, as we call it, direct democracy, because simply it's too diverse, it's too large, you have too many groups with diverging opinions. So that's also a reason, I think, why not so many other countries have such a direct democracy system. There are, however, certain areas where one tries to implement something like that on a local level. I know, for example, some cities in Germany, they make also such citizen votes on a lot of things that just are for the city important and not for all over for the whole of Germany. And somehow this works not too bad. So really on a rather local level, one could think of implementing such a thing also in bigger countries. A big disadvantage of that system is that it's slow. So when you have situations where a fast reaction of the government is required, then Switzerland is normally not very good. Since our government has not so much power, they always have to first ask Parliament. Parliament maybe say, okay, we make a vote and we are not sure and we can't decide. And sometimes it's months until there is actually a clear decision, sometimes even years. So again, the advantage of the system is it's very stable, at least in small countries, but the disadvantage, it's slow. As an example, I listed here the federal votes we had in 2020. About 4 times per year we have to vote on very different topics. I just take a few examples here. The third, maybe from the top, is the procurement of fighter jets. Our Air Force decided they need new jets. And since this is a very expensive, these jets are very expensive, then the Parliament basically said, okay, let's vote on that. And then we could vote if the Army or the Air Force is allowed to buy new jets. So we basically voted on the money. We didn't vote on the choice of a specific jet model or whatever, but we simply voted if they get the money or not to buy new jets. They got the money. Or the last one is more an economic thing, for example, that so there's an initiative for the constitution that Swiss companies would be forced to apply Swiss standards for human rights and the environment also abroad. So we have quite some multinational companies in Switzerland that are worldwide active. And this law would have meant that they would have to use the standards we have in Switzerland for the environment and for human rights also in Africa, in Asia, in South America, and wherever they do business. This was rejected because we said, even though that might be a nice thing to have, but this would be a very gross disadvantage economically for these companies, and the chance would be high that they somehow relocate to other countries if we implement something like this. On the executive level, we have only 7 ministers. This is that's the federal government now. This is also a bit special. I think most countries have much more. And furthermore, these 7 ministers are belong to always the 4 biggest parties in parliament. This is an unwritten rule. There's no law stating that, but somehow for a very long time, always the 4 biggest parties in parliament, they form the government. And from these 7 ministers, for each year, one of them is elected as president. So we have a different president every year. However, this president has no executive power. This is a pure representative role. And you see here currently the guy here in front with the blue tie, he's the current president, Guy Parmelin. All these ministers actually take decisions together. So the president has absolutely no decision power. For all the decisions that these ministers have to take, that the government has to take, they sit together and they vote. And when you count on this image, you see 8 heads and not 7. As I said before, we have 7 ministers. The person here on the very right side, also with a blue tie, he's actually the secretary of all the other 7, and he organizes these votes and these meetings of all these ministers and takes care that everything runs smoothly and this is the protocol is written and everything is documented correctly. So we don't have a single party system for the government. So it's always the 4 biggest parties that form the government. And this government takes all decisions in a vote with majority. There are majority decisions, which is, I think, also a bit unusual at least in Europe. Now, that was for politics. I think if you have specific questions, we can also discuss them later on. I wanted to cover some other parts that might be of interest to you. And since you're very young people, I thought maybe education could be an interesting topic. We have, as most countries, some compulsory schools up to about 15 or 16. This consists of 2 years of kindergarten and then 9 years of school. And after that, compulsory education, that is the same for everybody. You can choose if you want to go to a higher school, a grammar school as it's known in England, or, and that's a bit special, to make an apprenticeship. And in Switzerland, only about 25% go actually to a grammar school. And the huge majority, about 65%, is doing an apprenticeship or vocational training, as it's called. And this works such that you're hired by a company. So you have to apply there and they hire you as an apprentice, but about 2 days per week you spend in school. And in this school, you get some general education, language courses, politics, economics, bookkeeping, and these kind of things, and the theoretical background of the profession you learn in this apprenticeship. And the rest of the time you work in the company. And this leads to a situation where you, at the end, this is then 3 or 4 years, after 4 years or so, you have, on the one hand, a good theoretical background of the profession you learned, but also you had already a lot of practical experience and you could profit from experienced colleagues with whom you worked during these 4 years. And these people are actually pretty sought for. You can make a good salary when you do this system, and that's why it's also so attractive in Switzerland. If you like, after these 4 years, you can then go to another school. This is a University of Applied Science, as we call it, which is more or less on the same level as a classic university, and a little bit less than 10% actually do that. So it's an interesting thing because in most other European countries, at least, much more people go to grammar school, and then until about roughly 20 or so, and only then they sometimes, a lot of them even go to universities, and then they start to work. In Switzerland, it's actually different. We have a lot of people making this apprenticeship and start the work life much earlier, which is, I think, also from an economic point of view, this is very interesting because they contribute much earlier to the economy of the country, and furthermore, they can also they start earlier to earn quite good salaries and can afford themselves then a few other things that for example, young people who went to grammar school and then to university cannot at the beginning. If you have questions to that, we can probably also discuss that later on. Since you are now in a religious institution, I thought maybe you're interested a bit about religions in Switzerland. And actually, the biggest religious group is Roman Catholic still, but it's declining. And the fastest growing group is the second one, the ones with no religious affiliation. Churches of all kinds in Switzerland have a bit the problem that they lose a lot of people. But that's not only the Catholic Church, also the Protestant ones and the other ones, they face the same problem. Protestants are the third biggest group. Then you have some other Christian denominations, and actually also a fast-growing group is the Islamic religions, the Shiites and the Sunnis, and that's mostly because of immigration. We have a lot of immigrants from the Middle East regions, from Turkey, and most of them are actually Islamic. The last thing I would like to share with you is a bit that another thing that's maybe special about Switzerland is that we have a lot of international organizations, and most of them are based in Geneva. So when the Second World War was over, the United Nations were founded, and the headquarters of the United Nations is in New York in the United States. And at the time also there was a Cold War starting between the United States and the Soviet Union, what is today called Russia. And they there was never an actual war, but it was a kind of a lot of tensions they had over time. And it was not so easy to get a visum to enter the United States, for example, from people from the Soviet Union or from Russia, and maybe also from other countries that were not so in line with the United States. And then the United Nations organization somehow decided we need a second or a third site a bit outside of New York. And Switzerland was somehow attractive because, as I said, after the Second World War, we had a working infrastructure. We were neutral politically, so we didn't align with any of these blocs, neither the Soviet Union nor the Americans. And for that reason, I founded a second site in Geneva. And this was basically the starting point that a lot of other international organizations said, well, if they are in Geneva, we also go to Geneva. There's a good infrastructure there. There are already a lot of foreigners living in Geneva, so our staff will be not alone, not too strange. And there's a lot of, through these United Nations, one could make a lot of connections to other countries. Also, a lot of countries opened in diplomatic representations in Geneva. And so we have quite a bundle of international organizations there, which is somehow a bit lucky that the United Nations chose Geneva after the Second World War. But economically, I think for especially this region around Geneva, that's also very, very important. Geneva today has a foreign population of about 40%. So 40% of all the people living in Geneva are foreigners, which is a very, very high number for, at least for Europe. Yeah, sorry. That was a bit my short introduction and overview, and I think now, if you want, we can discuss certain topics a bit deeper if you have questions.
Yeah, you're invited to ask questions.
So you said that the government of Switzerland had only little power, but wouldn't it be hard to control the citizens and the people living there if the control was very little? Wouldn't it be very hard?
Sorry, could you repeat again? I somehow, the audio quality, this was a bit bad. I didn't get the whole question.
So you said that the government or the control of the citizens in Switzerland was very less and the power was very low. So how did the government control them? It will be very hard to control the citizens if they only have less power, right?
Well, of course, I don't know exactly what you mean by control, but police, for example, is a thing that we have not a federally organized police, but we have a locally organized police. Every canton, as we say it, every region has its own police. And of course, there are some laws that, for example, what is forbidden and what is allowed are made also on a national level. But the enforcement of these laws is then controlled by or made by these local police forces. We have no federal police, for example. We have an army, yes, but the army is not in its best shape, I would say. Probably if there would be a real war, maybe they would be defeated very easily. So it's not a very strong army. And this army is also not used against its own, the own citizens. The government itself has insofar a control that it can, for example, let's take an example, COVID-19 situation. As I said, Switzerland is normally not very good in reacting fast to certain situations. When COVID-19 broke out, there was a big cacophony of different reactions from the cantons at first, until one realized, that's probably a bit more severe than we originally thought, this virus. And then the central government said, okay, now we take away a little bit of power from the regions and we decide federally some measures. For example, there were closures of restaurants and shops and schools and so on. So we went into a lockdown in 2020. And this was basically enforced based on emergency laws by the federal government. So in such situation, yes, the federal government can actually take measures. But normally in other ways, they simply say, okay, we have some laws, but we rely on these cantonal police forces that they enforce it. Was this your question or not?
Yes, sir. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Excuse me, may I?
Yeah, sure.
You have said in the class right now that Switzerland is a country which is mainly orientated in import and export. Can you just point out some things which are mainly imported and exported from and into Switzerland?
Yes. There's a small slide on that. So the Switzerland has no natural resources, as I said. So there's no precious metals or whatever. But what you see here, the imports and exports of Switzerland, you see a lot of precious metals, actually a third or so, that we import and export. And this somehow highlights that we are very strong in trading. We have a lot of companies trading with precious metals, even though we don't have any precious metals ourselves in our soil. That's economically, it's actually, there are not so many companies active, but just the ones who are very large. The largest one is Glencore, for example. The second big topic is chemical products, and that's mostly for the pharma industry. We have a very strong pharmaceutical industry producing drugs. And of course, they need a lot of chemical products. And then probably another thing that is where we're pretty famous for is very specialized machines. Again, we don't have an industry that produces let's say computers or whatever, like Apple or Microsoft with software, or so these very, very big ones. But we have a lot of companies producing machines for very specialized applications in certain fields. There was, for example, there's one that is producing machines to make textiles for the cars. You know, the car seats, they need very, very strong textiles, much stronger than let's say the textiles you need to have for clothes. And you need different machines to do that. And so you have some companies being active in very, very specialized fields, small regions, and they're somehow in these very, very small niches, they are the world leaders. And what I also said, another, let's say the fourth more important sector is banking, financial services. This is, of course, this doesn't show up here in import and export, but we have a lot of banks, and as I also said, I tried to explain a bit, these banks were used by many foreigners in the past to, let's say, hide some money from the tax authorities of their home countries. And of course, Switzerland profited a lot from that. And nowadays, this gets a bit more and more difficult. And these banks, they are searching now a little bit for new business models, how they can survive still on a world market. But we have two of the, I think, 10 biggest banks in the world are actually Swiss. Is that okay, or do you need more details?
No, it's okay, thank you. And can I ask one more?
Sure.
If we compare the literacy rate of Switzerland and India, what's your comment on that?
Which rate, excuse me?
Literacy rate.
A literacy rate, sorry. It's pretty high in Switzerland. It's actually compulsory to go to school. These schools are also free. They're run by the government. So teachers are paid from tax money. I think there's a very, very small portion of people who is not literate. These are mostly either people who come, for example, as foreigners or as refugees or whatever from bit poorer countries come here, or of course there are some people who simply don't have the cognitive ability to learn that, and then they somehow have problems reading. But let's say this is much more than 99%, the literacy rate. I don't know much about India, I have to say, how high it is there. I guess it's also pretty high, because I know you have also quite good schools. So schooling system is I think it's an important topic in Switzerland. There is always a comparison in Europe of the different abilities of pupils when they leave school. How good do they do in math tests and language tests and so on. And there's quite intensive discussions always going on when for example, a country falls back by one rank, or one climbs up by one rank, or whatever. So somehow we compare pretty closely how the schooling systems of other countries in Europe are doing. And then there are a lot of recommendations to adapt and maybe take over some of their methods and abandon some of ours, or vice versa, or whatever. So this is, I think, all over Europe, this is a pretty important topic also for politics.
Sir, may I ask one question?
Yes, sure.
Sir, how was the health sector in Switzerland? Was they efficient in handling COVID-19? The doctor.
The health sector is, in general, now apart from COVID-19, health provisions are pretty good. We have a lot of hospitals. Switzerland being a rather rich country, I think can also afford that. If it's efficient, so the system works such that most hospitals are run by the government, but again, mostly on a local level. There are also a few private ones, but most of them are run by government. But as I'm not by the federal state, so it's not like in England where you have this National Health Service, or France has something similar that provides almost all healthcare. The hospitals here are run really by local authorities always, and also financed by the local authorities. And there is a compulsory system of health insurance. You have to have a health insurance, but again, these health insurance are private companies. You don't have a national health insurance run by the government, so private companies offer this service. And government somehow, the central government just decides what is covered, what has to be covered by these private companies. So the minimum they have to cover. They can then also offer additional insurances that cover more. And a lot of people make such insurances. And then you get maybe when you then have to go to hospital, you probably get instead of a 4-bed room, you get them in a 2-bed room and things like that, which is yeah, basically a bit a luxurious thing, a luxury that some people afford. And in COVID-19, the health system survived, so it never really collapsed. But since all the hospitals are run by the local authorities, it was not so easy to coordinate them. This took a while until the hospitals themselves set up a system that somehow allows them to distribute patients maybe to hospitals that were not so not full yet. So everybody got a treatment, but the hospitals then decided that other things, other treatments that are not actually for life-threatening diseases had to be postponed. There was, for example, a lot of cancer patients who had to wait longer to get a surgery or a chemotherapy or whatever. There had to be some other diseases that where the treatment simply were postponed by several months because hospitals said we need the staff now for the COVID patients. It was not so much a problem of hospital beds. Actually, hospital beds were, I think, always enough there, but it was more a problem of staff, of having enough qualified nurses and doctors. As I said, the government of Switzerland really made a lockdown in 2020, but since then they made an actual quite a bit less severe measures for COVID, because they said we need to keep the country running. We need as much as possible that people can go to work, that the shops are open, that the people can buy things. And they simply say that the number on which we orient ourselves is actually the hospitalization number. So we want to avoid situations where the hospitals are totally overrun and we don't have any spare capacity anymore in hospitals. And so the government more or less decided that as long as the hospital still can cope with the number of patients that have to go to hospital, then we don't do any lockdown anymore. And only when this gets very tight on the hospital side, then maybe we take stronger measures again. And this is now very interesting what happens next winter, because unlike in Kerala, Switzerland has quite a lot of, quite some strong different seasons. So winters are pretty cold with snow. And it's well known that this COVID-19 virus likes rather colder temperatures than hotter ones. And also last winter, the number of cases soared quite a bit. But somehow, as I said, hospitals could still cope. And we are now a bit curious what happens next winter. So we are almost back to normal in everyday life concerning COVID. But when the health situation deteriorates, I think government will probably announce new measures. Unfortunately, the vaccination rate is not so high in Switzerland. It's only about 60% of the people are vaccinated, because we have for a reason I absolutely don't understand, we have a lot of people who are against this vaccination. Even though we have enough doses, that's not a problem, but people hesitate because they don't trust these pharma companies, and in general, vaccinations have a bad reputation among them, which is, as I said, something I really don't understand as a scientist.
Sir, we all know that Switzerland is the first country to pass legislation which allows same-sex marriage. According to IFO poll 2013, 63% of the Swiss public supported allowing same-sex marriage and couples to marry and adopt children. Sir, what's your stand on this enforcement?
Yes, it's true. So there was a vote also I think it was last year, yes, or it was this year, that couples of the same sex can marry, and it is a controversially discussed topic in Switzerland, but I think really that the majority of the people accept that now. This is seen as nothing too strange anymore. And I'm personally, basically also think that this is not a fault of these people when they are homosexual. They somehow are born like that. That's a biological thing rather than an error or cultural thing or something like that one can easily correct. And the question if they can have children, that's a bit a more difficult one. They can, of course, adopt children, but there is also a discussion if they're allowed to get, how do you call that in English? Basically, if they can, for example, two females who want to marry and to have a child can get a in vitro fertilization with the semen of another man. And that's theoretically now allowed, but here the acceptance is probably less in the total society than just with the marriage. Was this roughly your question, or?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. No other questions?
Sir, do you think Switzerland can maintain the political neutrality that it has always kept during the further years as the conflict between America and China escalates, and also there are many other conflicts in the world? Do you think Switzerland can maintain the neutrality it has kept for all these years?
I think so, yes, because Switzerland is a small country. A country of the size of India, that would be more difficult, because simply your strategic relevance is much higher. Switzerland is not so relevant for these strategically for any of these blocks. And I think, yes, we try to.
But as far as trade goes, what would you think happen?
As I wanted to say now that economically it will be another story. There are also in the past, even though being politically strictly neutral, we had much more economic relationships with the US than, for example, with Russia. So on the economic side, this was never a pure neutrality. This was just a political neutrality or a military neutrality, if you want. So we didn't join NATO, for example. There's this defense club around US, where Germany and France and so are members. Economically, we always had that very strong relations with the US and rather weak ones with Russia. Now with China, it's a bit different because there's a lot of money now in China. There are a lot of rich people, and investors in the US and also in Europe, they got a bit cautious. They somehow don't invest in companies they think they're a bit risky, which leads to the situation that, for example, young companies or companies who want to expand in Europe, they often look towards China for some risk capital, because these Chinese investors are much more risk friendly. They are somehow used to that things can go wrong and they lose part of the money or whatever, and accept that. And I think this is a bit a question of wealth. Europe is so wealthy and got somehow used to be so wealthy that everybody fears to lose some money, and therefore they got quite risk averse. And in China, it's still it's not the case yet. Maybe it will also come when China will become wealthier. And therefore, we have quite some Chinese investment also in Switzerland. And this is seen now more and more as a bit a problem, because the political systems of Switzerland and of China are absolutely incompatible. And one fears a little bit that China tries to influence also decision-making processes, for example, in Switzerland, and influencing votes and these kind of things. So the public opinion changed in the last few years a bit against China, I would say. Financially, there's still quite some involvement of China, but publicly this is seen as more and more problematic. I don't know where this will lead. China is, of course, a big market. One sector I forgot to mention when I talked about our exports, a big export-oriented industry is watchmaking. Switzerland is somehow famous for nice, precious, and expensive watches. And these watches are, they sell roughly half of the revenue they make in China now, at least the very expensive brands, because there are quite a lot of Chinese, rich Chinese people. And there again, when we cut too much our ties with China, we somehow hurt our own industry. But people feel a bit uneasy that China, that they will also face probably retaliations from the US or from other countries when they do too much business with China. So it's a delicate balance, and nobody knows at the moment how in which direction this will develop. That's a bit the situation. So one simply observing and seeing what is going on. It's also probably have heard that in China there's a huge construction company which ran into financial difficulties, and it's really a very, very large company with I think several 100,000 employees. And since a lot of European and US companies are also invested in China, they have subsidiaries there. One feels a little bit that when, for example, this huge construction company, Evergrande it's called, and this goes bankrupt, then this will cause a shockwave in the whole Chinese economy, and this shockwave will then also affect Europe and the United States. So somehow we're very much connected already, and it remains to be seen if we can maintain that, or if the political tensions get so fierce that we have to disentangle a little bit. But I think the companies, they would like to stay in China if it's possible, because it's a huge market.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. So, no other questions. Father Arun, how do we continue? What is the program?
Yeah. Brisman?
Okay, sorry, you're the...
Sorry. Now we are moving to the concluding session. 5-year classes are very much useful to us. All the topics and the doubt clearance session, which was related to the contemporary situation of Switzerland, was really interesting. Now I invite Ronnie Sibena, 4th batch, to for thanking you.
The privilege and pleasure is mine to thank you for the class you took, sir. Even though this meeting is organized in an online form, I am pretty much sure we all who are present here were on a journey to Switzerland. You are the one who took us through the journey. We all took a quick visit through its geography, political and educational policies, its parliamentary decisions, its elections. And I will say, comparing with India, it's really much different in Switzerland in case of education, parliamentary elections, etc. So the class, the hour was well spent without any discomfort or boredom. And by hearing such doubts, I am really sure all of them who are here were really attuned to your class. I would say we have covered half of the Switzerland country just by this class with your slides and with your words, sir. So I would like to extend my gratitude to your parents who took part in this meeting, because it's a moment of pride for them too to take part in your class. And I would like to extend my gratitude to Father Thomas Plapley, the one who introduced you. So thank you everyone who all participated in this. And on behalf of our STARS community, we thank you for the class, sir.
Thank you for these nice words. The pleasure was on my side.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Rolf Kauffmann. It was really a great time with you. And I'm so happy that your parents are also with us. And I remember Apple was a good friend of mine, so who became instrumental for this gathering. So it was a great experience, and we hope you will be with us in the future also.
Yes, thank you. As I said, pleasure was on my side. It was interesting. Thank you for the discussion. I hope I didn't tell things that were too boring. And yeah, maybe we have the chance to meet in person one time in the future when COVID is over. So let's see. If you come to Switzerland and visit Father Plappalil, then I can probably arrange a meeting also here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I wish you a good Saturday, good rest of the day, and I think in India it's probably already lunchtime maybe now, huh?
Almost, but you are
almost. So what we say here in Switzerland, this is when we go and have a meal together, we say "en gute." So basically, enjoy your meal.
Yeah. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. Have a nice day, and bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll contact you later.
Okay, that's fine. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, now we are moving to the next session of our program. Now I request all the parents to join the meeting with the student. Okay, now I invite our director, Reverend Father Arun Kalamattathil, to discuss about the homeworks and give some general instructions.
Yeah. നിങ്ങൾക്കെന്നെ കേൾക്കാമെന്ന് വിചാരിക്കുന്നു അല്ലേ? എല്ലാവർക്കും കേൾക്കാമല്ലോ? ഞാൻ ഹെഡ്ഫോണോട് ഒന്ന് കണക്ട് ചെയ്യാം.
Yes, okay. Acha keka acha.